Yo guys, welcome to the video. This is Josh or Milky, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the train updated version for the preseason. If you haven't had the chance to check out the preseason yet, essentially there is a full reset on the economy and you have to do everything again, but it's a full reset, and there are some additional pieces of content. Like in your maps, you're going to see these additional bosses that drop a good amount of loot. During leveling, you can easily get some leveling gear, so getting your first character up and running is very easy. You get tons of extra XP. Also, there are some chests that drop some loot, and additionally, there is a mod applied to you at all times, which causes you to trigger your main skill every 3 meters moved, and this has a cooldown of 0.4 seconds. There is also meant to be something that makes it so 40% of the movement speed bonus also applies to additional damage. That currently doesn't seem to be working. Hopefully they change that. But we're going to talk about how that affects the train Rehan build. And the first thing we're going to talk about is Rain of Arrows. If you've ever seen a version of this build using Exquisite Box and casting Rain of Arrows, there's a very good reason for that. And it's because Rain of Arrows actually can, hit range targets. And with it being an attack skill, it means you can trigger your burst, which is your hero trait and your main source of damage on this build. You can trigger it on mobs that aren't just within melee range of you. So it adds a ton of clear, and also triggering a second attack means you're going to make sure you're using burst on cooldown more often. So balancing that kind of breakpoint between attack speed and cooldown is less relevant because you've got so many things triggering. More often than not, you're going to be triggering burst as soon as it comes off of cooldown. So that's how the build works. Burst is your damage. Don't get tricked into thinking Rain of Arrows is your damage or your Savage Charge is your damage. I see a lot of people falling for that. The main source of damage is your hero trait. It's this thing right here on your first hero trait, Burst, and it triggers when you attack on a 0.3 second cooldown. Later on, it will also trigger when you crit, but we'll get to that in a second. You also gain additional burst damage. But if you've ever played a cast on crit build, think about it like that. You're essentially hitting the mobs and triggering this damaging ability, which you can then support with various other things, whether it be crit damage or steamroll. And that's kind of how your base damage works. So it scales with 550% of your base weapon damage, which means that getting a weapon with as much physical damage as possible, which is these two numbers here, is very important. Attack speed doesn't matter, so don't get fooled by this first number, as this number does actually get, affected by the attack speed. But since the attack speed doesn't matter, what you want to look at is the average of these two numbers. That is your base damage. And then times that by 5.5 and you've got your flat damage. So that's, if you're ever thinking, how do I get more damage? The core part of the build is the weapon. And that's why I have this weapon here crafted with, T0 flat fizz, T0% fizz, enchanted more % fizz, and then various other modifiers, which we'll talk about later on. So that's the core part of the build. We're going to start quite easy, so I'm going to timestamp the video. If you want to skip forward because you already know how to level this build, feel free to do so. But for the people that haven't played this before, leveling is going to be quite easy, especially on this preseason. I chose to trigger Berserking Blade as my skill whilst I was leveling up to level 44, as it's just, you actually need to do some damage with your main skill early on. As Burst, you haven't quite got your hero traits yet. So like this hero trait that gives you the 2 support skills, this one that makes it so your burst does 120% additional damage, you're not going to have them early. So using Berserking Blade is going to be more than enough. And you can still Savage Charge around to add in a bit more damage and also to make you a bit faster. It's more than reasonable. But basically, the goal early on is to sustain rage, because burst can only trigger while you are berserking. The way we're going to do this is by combining Righteous Fury, which says gain 20 points of rage while berserk is not active, generate 2 rage for every 1% of life consumed. So you need to be able to consume life, and the way that we do that is by starting out in the God of Might and Onslaughter tree. If you come across to this point right here that says consumes 2% of your current life when you use attack skills, that is essentially how we're going to consume life to generate rage and then have 100% uptime on your rage. This is very important early on, as it's going to increase your damage 10 times. It's very, very important. Also, being able to sustain that life cost is very important as well, which is why we take Tenacity or Tenacity Blessings and combine it with this mod that gives us, flat life regen per stack of Tenacity Blessing. We also have things like regain, so that when we're in combat, we can actually regen some of that life that we are spending to attack. So those things are very important. And that, for the first, for the first 50 levels, 62 levels even, is very, very strong. Before then, before you get to this point, you get this point at level 44. Before then, you just got to make do with what you have. There's no way to sustain rage before this point. So you may be on a bit of a struggle bus until level 44. Honestly, in the preseason, you definitely won't be, as you'll have access to all the various leveling items. I'll show some good ones. There's things like Lonesome, which causes your main skill to be supported by added fire, cold, lightning, erosion. There's also a weapon called Ominous Guillotine, which is going to massively increase your AoE, because normally at level 38 you'd get sacrificed, but you can equip this at level 8 and you will drop one if you're playing on the preseason, and it gives you access to sacrifice, which basically gives you 7% additional damage and 8% skill area for each tenacity blessing, which you're going to have a lot of due to this talent point, the talent point you get level 10. So as early as level 10, when you get this talent point and you equip this axe, you're going to be absolutely flying. So once you've done this and you feel like you're ready, you're now going to need to look for the following item. You're going to want a relic that gives you rage on hit, or a memory that gives you rage on crit. The total that you need, 6 is absolutely fine. And as soon as you get this, you are in a position to respec to these trees that are on the second builder that I'm going to link in the description, and you can change over to the pure physical damage setup. You're going to notice at this point, when you hit this mod, you can either purchase it at level 60 when you get access to the trade house. They're fairly cheap. You'll swap this hero trait, Righteous Fury, over to Frenzy Furious, and then you will get, obviously a huge amount of crit rating. You'll also get a huge amount of attack damage when you land a crit strike for every 5 rage. So obviously you're going to have 100 rage, which is 20 additional attack damage. So it's very strong, and obviously all that crit rating you're going to get is very good as well. You're going to notice when you swap over to these trees, you increase your damage significantly. But the problem is, if you don't have this memory or relic, you've basically got rid of your ability to permanently sustain rage, because as I said, it was very important that we were in this tree, the Onslaught tree, getting this medium talent. So what you will do instead, if you are yet to get your relic or memory, is to equip the Recklessness support gem. Recklessness causes you to spend 3% of your life when you attack with a skill. So this is what you would use to consume life at this point, and it is going to be obviously more difficult to sustain that, as it is 3% instead of 2%. So it's really important that you have this set up before swapping to these trees. If it's not the end of the world, but you might die a bit because you're going to be spending all your life in order to sustain your rage. But at this point of the build, you should be absolutely flying. You can start to pick up some low-level uniques, things like Chain of Resistance, or even a Vortex Heart if you can find one of those. Praise for Injury is going to give you access to Explode. The way that you're going to inflict trauma is with one of your auras, Acuteness Imbue. And then the rest, obviously, is just capping out your resistances, getting as much cooldown as possible in order to reduce the cooldown on this effect right here, where it says, the attacks trigger burst. So cooldown, very important for the build. And you can even get something like a Heavy Wear that causes you to deal 25% additional damage to enemies that are nearby. So at this point, popping off, you're going to be absolutely flying all the way up to T7s if you have something even remotely similar to this builder. Another very good memory you can get is the one that gives you additional damage while you're berserking. So if you have this at 1.5%, it's going to stack up 15 times. And this one mod alone, over the course of a map, because you constantly berserk, after 15 seconds of the map, for the entire rest of the map, you're going to do 22.5% more damage. So if you're ever looking for damage, make sure you have things like this. The memories are very, very strong. 22% damage is obviously nothing to scoff at. Yeah, this is where I'd start out. You could also, if you feel like it, you could grab a Soul Finale with two Relic engrams only, and then you'll get 45% chance to deal double damage and the additional crit rating. So this is an alternative if you choose to use that. Now, moving on to the more end game builder, this is obviously where things are going to get more relevant to people that are looking for how you scale this build into the end game. I will go ahead and say straight away, this build doesn't get up to 99 billion damage. If you're looking for a build like that, this isn't it. This is a very comfortable league starter that's going to get you into those 8-2s, 8-3s. At a push 8-4s, you'll be able to do it, but you're going to need some good gear, maybe an Eternity, stuff like that. I can just about doing it with my current setup. But it's I'm relying on Explode in order to kill some of the tankier mobs. And the reason for that is it doesn't have that many methods of scaling the build outside of obviously a weapon, and you can only get so much weapon damage. You can't, get it infinitely. So you do become a bit restricted in your ability to scale it further into the end game. But the best way to do it slate-wise is just to get more multipliers. So you have things like additional damage to life, additional damage against cursed enemies, additional damage taken by enemies in proximity, additional damage for weapons. This 100% skill radius if main skill is not used. Casting your main skill, which is Rain of Arrows on this preseason, doesn't actually count as a use, so you can constantly have 100% skill radius. And then some additional flat damage per level is very nice as well. For the pedigree, I go with Rushed. An alternative is to use Great Strength, which is the first major talent in the God of Might tree. It's right here, 30% additional attack damage, and we don't really care about that attack speed. So a cheaper alternative would be Great Strength if you can't afford a Rushed pedigree. And then getting any cooldown is very nice, so you have this 6% cooldown here. And then for the rest, just look for more mods. As I mentioned earlier, just more additional damage. And the nice thing as well about this build is it's literally a 0-button build. Everything activates automatically because of rhythm. You can even use blurry steps over Burst of Anger if you want. You'd have to press that yourself though, or you're going to have a pretty low uptime on it. And then you can also use a Resurrection Warcry as the rhythm allows it to cast automatically. So you're going to get that life recovery and you're going to gain that additional damage reduction that it inherently gives when it hits an enemy. It gives up to like 24% reduced damage taken. So very, very strong. So all these builders will be linked in the description. They're going to be pretty well set up for endgame. If you have something akin to this builder, you're going to be farming T8s pretty easily, maybe not pushing into those 8-4s. But now we'll go into game and I'll show you what I'm currently working with and what I am able to do. So first of all, I obviously have pretty good gear. I've been playing a stupid amount. Fool's Crown. This physical damage to main hand weapon, as I mentioned, base weapon damage is the fundamental part of how this build scales, and this actually gets scaled by any percent modifiers you have on the weapon. So you can see I have 180% gear physical damage on this weapon. That scales my Fool's Crown. So that 120 or whatever damage gets times by 2.8, and then that it obviously goes onto my base damage. So Fool's Crown is very, very strong for this build. It's about a 35% increase in damage for me with the weapon that I have. For you, it may be different. It depends on your weapon, how much percent gear fizz you have, and how much flat your weapon already has. You don't really have to work that out. Fool's Crown is always good. Then you have something like the new Double Rainbow. I don't recommend this to everyone, but I mean, stat-wise, it is one of the best, if not the best chest in the game for this build, as previously, we're using Heavy Wear, which gives like 25% more damage and 25% reduced damage taken. The way that this item works is it grants 10% additional damage and reduces damage by 8% for each combined resistance. So you have 4 resistances, and the way this works, obviously, is Fire Res matches Cold, Lightning, Erosion, then Cold matches Lightning, Erosion, then Lightning matches Erosion. I'm supposed to be using Pets. It gets me up to 82. But what you'll see is you end up getting 6 times the value. So I get 60% additional damage dealt, and I take 48% reduced damage just from this chest. So the chest is very good, but if you want to just use a Heavy Wear, feel free to do so. This is very annoying to try and balance. As I said, I have to use Pets in order to do it. Let's go on to the correct planner. So if I have this one with the Pets actually active, you can see all mine are balanced at 82, but this required some fine tuning, and I had to craft and Truth Ember gear to get it perfect. It's very frustrating. So use it if you're willing to do that. If not, it's no problem. Now for the necklace, I am currently using an Eternity. A good alternative, if you can afford it, is a box. The reason box is so good is because it makes you deal 96% additional damage with triggered skill. So it's literally just, well, it's pretty much double damage for the build at 96%, close enough, right? Burst is a triggered skill, so this makes it do 96% additional damage. The thing about Burst, though, and one thing I will mention right now, this is somewhat confusing for people. This mod right here that says minus 20% additional cooldown recovery speed for triggered skills. Any modifier that affects the cooldown recovery speed of triggered skills does not affect Burst. Now, the only reason I can think this is the case is because the Burst is a triggered skill, but the effect that gives it a cooldown is yours. It's your hero trait. It's your cooldown. You are not the triggered skill. You are not the burst. So it doesn't work. Whether that rationale helps you or not, take my word, it does not work. Whether or not you have cooldown for triggered skills, do not worry. So this penalty actually doesn't apply to us. It doesn't cause our cooldowns to take longer. But don't get baited into that. If you see mods on candles, for example, that's like cooldown recovery for triggered skills, it's not good for you. Don't worry about it. The rest, we have obviously still the gloves, the belt. My belt's pretty shocking right now, but cooldown, resistance. Eventually, there's a mod on belt that causes you to take reduced damage when you have reserved a lot of your mana. That's going to be a very good mod to get. And then life, armor, that kind of stuff. Boots, you want as much move speed and cooldown as you can, as well as capping any resistances. You can also get this percent life roll on your boots, which is very strong. These boots end up giving me a lot of life. Then rings, resistance, life, same deal. And then your weapon. This is a very important part. The weapon is obviously the most important part of this build because it's all your base damage. So let's talk about how we're going to craft this item. The very important thing is that you start with Focus Strike. I didn't, but I would not recommend doing it how I did it. The reason for that is Focus Strike has a much lower weighting to slam than the alternative mod, which is the movement speed mod, right? So we're going to start with Focus Strike. This doesn't matter if you plan on making like the perfect hammer. This doesn't actually matter. You can start with pretty much anything. But in this instance, we're going to assume that it's acceptable to have tier 1 of this mod right here, the additional attack, cast, move speed mod. And the reason for that is, you know, it's all nice, but for the amount of FEs you're going to spend to hit the tier 0 version, is it worth it? You'd have to decide. But I would start with Focus Strike and then re-roll with Focus Strike locked until you hit the flat physical plus knockback roll. This one right here. This is very important to hit first, as it is rarer to get than Gear Fizz, and it's important that you have it because you only have a limited amount of plasticity to hit the third modifier. So once you have flat physical, you can reroll until you hit tier 1, or you can reroll to your tier 2 and then upgrade it to tier 1. But at that stage, you have a limited amount of plasticity to hit a decent roll of this Gear Fizz and then upgrade it to tier 1. So at this stage, you would have tier 1 Gear Fizz, tier 1 Flat Fizz, and Focus Strike. I know, obviously, I'm going fast, but this would take you longer to do than obviously it was me describing it. At this stage, you would have these 3 modifiers plus 2 other random modifiers. And you have to ask yourself if you're willing to gamble. If you want to make a hammer like mine, it will on average take you 6 attempts to upgrade both of these mods without deleting the Focus Strike. Bear that in mind. If you want to just upgrade one of the mods, you will only have to use 2 on average. It becomes a 50-50, as there are 2 good mods and 2 bad mods. We want to remove one of the bad mods, so 50-50. So you can choose at this point whether or not you want to gamble. I would recommend, with the current prices of Ultimate Embers and the current price of bases, just to stick with one upgraded modifier. And I would say to upgrade the percent gear physical. The reason for this is this modifier also scales your Fool's Crown. That's why I'd say to upgrade the percent gear physical. Hopefully you removed one of your bad mods, and at this point, hopefully you have an open suffix. It's quite important that you have an open suffix, obviously, because we want to target process this movement speed modifier. And at this stage, you will always have an open suffix. So what you will do is you will just target process until you hit what you consider an acceptable roll of the movement speed mod. Obviously, the attack and cast speed doesn't really do anything for you. This is only there for the additional movement speed. So you have to decide personally, how much additional move speed do I want? You know, how fast do you want to go? It's just a luxury, right? Going fast, but going fast equals more mobs, more maps, more money. So it's your decision, but obviously I'd say go for tier 1. And it's going to be pretty good. You can have 1 tier 0 modifier, 3 tier 1 modifiers, and whatever you happen to have left over. You can put on crit damage if you have room, and you're good. So that's how you will make the hammer. If you have any questions about this, feel free to ask them in the comments. It's not super complicated if you've crafted before, but I know some people find the crafting quite daunting, but I'm happy to help you if you have any questions in the comments. So that's the gear. Probably quite long-winded, but hey ho, this is going to be your one-stop shop for the build, so there it is. In terms of relic, I choose to go with the Varagon Symphony of Souls. This is because it gives you 18% additional damage. Rehan gets very bad relics, and outside of some very expensive legendary relics, this is the best one. Gives you 18% additional melee damage while you're berserking, which is all the time. So you're going to be good. And the reason it's all the time is, as I said, you want to have a memory that gives you rage on crit. This will be more than enough to mean that you sustain berserk all the time in combat. It may drop between packs sometimes if there's a long way between them, but with how fast you're going, this shouldn't happen very often. I choose to get it with move speed. If you want raw damage, you could get it with this mod right here that I showed earlier that gives you 22.5% additional damage once it's stacked up 15 times. So I then have 2 of these ones. That's what I'd recommend for the memories. There is a memory that you could look into buying, which is the legendary memory. It changes the build slightly. It's expensive and it's hard to manage, but a very good one is the end of the hero. If you have a lot of FEs, then this one is very strong. Obviously, 80% additional damage is much more than 22.5, but it does mean that you consume 10% of your life per second, so you have to find a way to combat this. The best way I've found is to craft your boots. There's a modifier that makes it so you regen 5% of your life whilst moving, and then you need to make up the other 5% somewhere. I haven't tried it personally, but that arguably could be the best way to play this guy later on. Next, we'll look at what I have for slates. It's very similar to what is on the builder, but I'll just show it briefly. Rushed, additional damage to life, additional damage to weapons, additional damage to enemies in proximity, additional damage against cursed enemies, all skills. The all skills doesn't really matter. I just got lucky with this slate. This all skills doesn't really do much for you. I've got move speed on defeat. This slate's whatever. It's literally just here for move speed on defeat. And then a cooldown slate that also gives me paralysis. And you need a little bit of sealed mana. A little bit of sealed mana will mean that you can reserve all the auras. The auras being Acuteness Imbue, Weapon Amplification, and Fearless. You get 4% sealed mana from the tree. You need a tiny bit more to be able to reserve everything. So you need some sealed mana on one of your slates. As for the skills, this will obviously be in the builder, but I'll show it very briefly. If you're using bots, you don't need Rhythm on Resurrection Warcry. I'm currently using Blurry Steps. This can be exchanged with Burst of Anger, Bull's Rage, and then here are the auras. Very good. As for candles, mine are pretty sucky right now. Cooldown's very good, movement speed's very good. Eventually, we're going to want the tier 0 modifier that causes you to gain movement speed, skill radius, and damage on killing an enemy. But that's obviously a little bit down the line. We'll see if we can get to that. And that'll be it. That's it. The rest obviously will be in the builder. The talents haven't changed anything from last season, and neither is it. So I'll hit the dummy a little bit. I'll do it without damage pets, so you can get a decent idea of where I'm at with my level of gear. Let's see. Let's whack away. So we need that 15 seconds to ramp up. And we're at, you know, a few billy. 6 bill. We're chilling. 6 bill. A lot of gear. But as I say, Train is not the highest damage build in the game. But it's more than capable of taking care of maps and getting everything done so that you can farm for your next build. Obviously, if you put on DPS pets, well, my DPS goes a little bit higher. That's a little bit of a demonstration of what pets can do for you. I go up to 12 billion. But yeah, that is the build as I currently have it. I'm enjoying the preseason. I hope that the movement speed to additional damage of main skill gets fixed, if it is indeed a bug, which it definitely seems to be so. If you have any questions about this build, please feel free to ask in the comments or hit me up on stream. I'm pretty much always live at the start of a new Torchlight season, so I'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions or guide you in any way. Thanks for watching. I will see you next time.